about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength of street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Warrior Creed with me, the radical Maajid Nawaz, and joining me again, as usual, the co-host that way, Usman, the infamous. And our guest today, as you can no doubt see on the screen, is Dave Rubin from the Rubin Report. Welcome, Dave. It's been a long time since we've been united on the screen, hasn't it?
It's great to be with you guys. Maajid, I got to tell you, I just said to my guys before we started, when is the last time that you and I did something on camera together?
Yeah.
And I can't believe this is true. They're telling me it was June of 2017 back at my house in LA. I mean, that feels like many, many lifetimes ago. I'm sure for you as well as me. I mean, just crazy. I'm pretty sure we had a dinner that night with some of the old crew, and boy, have things gone in different directions since then, huh?
Well, that's why I wanted to have you on, because, of course, as you know, I had this reunion with Sam Harris on my podcast, which I released exclusively on Radical Media via my Substack. So anyone interested in that, it's majidnawaz.substack.com. And we hadn't spoken since before COVID. And of course, as you know, Dave, you know very well, Sam went in one very particular direction. So I had a conversation with him in the spirit of the one that I had with him prior to that on the then vexing issue of the topic of Islam and the future of tolerance. But the vexing topic this time around wasn't anything indeed to do with Islam, but was in fact to do with everything in the world post Donald Trump, which he and I, and probably you and him, seem to be on opposite ends of perpetually when it comes to the stances he's chosen to take. And whether it was Trump, Hunter Biden, election interference, Jan 6, COVID mandates, all of that, he seems to have taken a very, very different stance. So I had that conversation. I thought it'd be nice to bring you on to Warrior Creed, because he mentioned you by name in that chat as one of the people he's fallen out with. And I thought our listeners, your listeners, his listeners, everybody post-COVID now is interested in where the chips fall. And let's start with that, Dave. Let's start with that sort of, it's been such a long time, but so much has changed. Let's start with where your relationship is with other, maybe you want to begin with Sam, but anyone else as well, other members of the old so-called IDW crew. I never used that word, by the way. That's why I said. But anyway, the old crew. Go for it.
Right. Well, the funny thing about the IDW, the intellectual dark web, is that Eric Weinstein said it once. I think it was at a live show in San Francisco with, it was a Sam show with Ben Shapiro. I was in the audience for that one. And he kind of said it as a joke, but then it really caught on. And, you know, that was at the peak, really, as Jordan Peterson, out of all of us, was just absolutely exploding. And then, you know, I had the incredible honor, and I really mean that, of opening for Jordan for about a year and a half, all of 2018 into 2019, about 120 shows, something like 20 countries. I mean, it was absolutely incredible. Got to see you and Douglas and some of the other guys when we were in London. As far as the relationships, I think, except for Sam, I have a good relationship with everybody. Jordan was just here for dinner, and my oldest son's middle name is Jordan, in honor of Jordan. Ben and I are still tight. I'm good with the Weinsteins. Brett's helping DeSantis here deal with some COVID stuff, so that's been great. The disappointing thing with Sam, and it's sort of a, you know, this is the weird thing about doing what we all do on camera, is that I would always prefer to deal with these things when you have, you know, tussles with friends or differences with friends. I would always prefer to deal with that off camera. And then if you can sort of get to a place of relative agreement on maybe what you disagree with, then you can bring it on camera. And that, I think, is how you can honor a friendship within all of this. That can be very, very tough to do, as you guys know, in this world of clicks and algorithms, and everybody's angry at everybody all the time and all of that stuff. I will say this about Sam. If we've had a falling out, it honestly did not have to do with me. Over the years, starting with the Trump stuff and then into the COVID stuff, I always, even though I knew Sam and I had disagreements on this stuff, and believe me, there's plenty of text records to prove it, was always texting him and calling him saying, hey, I don't care if we have differences. We're friends. It's all good. You and Annika have been to our house for dinner many, many times. We've shared many dinner parties together, gone out to dinner and events many times. Like, it doesn't matter if we disagree on everything. We should be okay as human beings.
I should clarify for everybody, Annika being his wife. Just to
Yeah. Unfortunately, I suppose that wasn't the way he dealt with it, and here we are. And it really is okay. You know, I think I can probably would imagine this goes for you guys too. I didn't get into this thing for friends. I've got plenty of friends. My best friend to this day is my buddy John, who I met the first day of kindergarten in 1981 in Long Island, and we're still friends 40-something years later. So I have friends. It's been nice to make great friends and have people, you know, the beauty of that IDW thing, Maajid, when we went to dinner at Douglas Murray's flat in London, and it was me, you, Douglas, Jordan, and was anyone else there? I guess that was it. And Jordan's wife was there. It was like, wow.
Tammy was there.
We come from such different places. We agree on some stuff, we disagree on some stuff, but we just had a great night over food and drinks. And that really is what it's all about. So it's never upset me really to shut off a friendship with somebody because of political differences. I think unfortunately with Sam, he went really deranged with the Trump stuff. I even said to him once, something to the effect of, I said, Sam, you don't believe in God, but you do believe that Trump is the devil. I don't think he loved that one. But the point is, I don't mean that to be gratuitous. I just can get past that. Some people, I guess, can't to some degree.
So was it so if I've understood it, because my parting of stances, if you like, not parting of ways, because we're still in touch, but my parting of stances with him was on the COVID stuff mainly. What yours started on the Trump stuff, did it?
He was very upset that I was coming around to supporting Trump. First off, I didn't vote for Trump the first time. I voted for Gary Johnson, who was the libertarian. And it wasn't until maybe 2.5 years into Trump's presidency that I decided to support him. And that was after going to many rallies, meeting many people, actually meeting him face to face and having a chat with him. And then I started realizing what now I think so many of us see to be true, which is that Trump actually was not the problem. He was trying to solve a problem, was certainly imperfect. And I have a lot of frustrations with him right now, actually, because of the way he's been towards DeSantis, but that's a separate thing. But Sam just kind of couldn't get on board that. If you remember, Maajid, the last time I saw you, I think, we went out to dinner in LA at a rooftop restaurant, me, you, Sam, Eric was there, maybe Brett was there, a couple other people, and we were really getting into it. It was getting pretty heated at the table, and it was interesting because I wasn't really sure what you felt about Trump and sort of the way I had shifted and that I was suddenly friendly with these conservatives who I had some differences of opinion with, but, we could do that dance. And by the end of the meal, I was like, wow, Maajid and I really are seeing the world in a very, very similar way. That's very dissimilar from what's going on with Sam. And actually, that might be the last time I saw Sam because COVID was shortly after that, and that was it.
And I remember that dinner very well. And I remember the shift that you went through around the Trump question as it erupted.
And it was heated. You remember we got into it at that dinner, like big time at a public restaurant, and it was getting heated and sweaty.
And it would behoove me to say actually that my meeting you was introduced through Sam. I mean, it's important to acknowledge the only reason I knew you was Sam made an introduction because you had just left Young Turks and you had just started out on your own show. Sam was, I think, your very first interview, and I was your second or so. I don't know if it was, but in those days, I was doing it from a hotel room and you were on YouTube. It was a very early thing. And he said, listen, there's this guy, Dave, he just left Young Turks. I think it's worth having a chat with him on his show because I've just done his first episode on his new solo show. So it's worth acknowledging that because I always being, in terms of relationships I have, it's always important to acknowledge and give credit where credit's due. And he did introduce us, but the stuff on Trump, I never fully grasped because he, as I witnessed with you, he took a very stringent line as opposed to taking a more analytical perspective on development. So look at the way the world's changing, look at what Trump might be a symptom of, but rather it focused on just a visceral emotion towards Trump himself, which some would later on came actually to describe as TDS, but I don't want to get into kind of insulting people with that, but he did have a visceral focus on Trump. But then on the COVID stuff is where my main concerns emerged, because as you probably remember, Trump wasn't my big thing. I mean, I had concerns with his Muslim, he used the phrase Muslim ban on his campaign tour, which I had a big problem with. If you want to have a ban of 6 countries, name the 6 countries. Don't make it about the 1.7 billion Muslims on the planet. But that's another, that's old news. The COVID stuff.
I did a whole show on that with our friend Faisal Al-Mutar.
Yeah.
I'm with you. Yeah.
Iraqi US asylum seeker Faisal. But hello, Faisal. It's been
me too. He's great. He's absolutely great.
The COVID stuff. Where were you on the COVID stuff? That's the question I was coming around to, because I know exactly where he was, and hence my, I've done. You're the third such attempted reunion we've been engaged in. So first, if you may have seen, I did a Jordan thing on his podcast with Jordan, and then Sam on mine. And now you on Warrior Creed, but Sam's was on the Substack. But I know with Jordan and Sam where I stand with some of the way in which the world has changed. But on the COVID stuff, where were you on a lot of the mandates? And were you in right from the beginning? Were you on to that, or did you come around to certain skepticism on that later on?
I'm very, very, very proud to say I have a really good track record on what happened with COVID. After 2 weeks, and this is what I say all the time, I grant everybody about a month of craziness. When they came in with that 2 weeks to flatten the curve or whatever, sometimes they said 15 days to flatten the curve, whatever it was.
It's surreal.
I think everybody, we were all so bludgeoned over the head with something that sounded so crazy that there's almost nobody who got it right from the beginning. I can think of one guy. There's a guy by the name of Jeffrey Tucker who works at a libertarian think tank in the United States, who I've had on the show a bunch of times. And he's a great thinker. You absolutely should have him on if you haven't. He got it right from day one. I mean, from day one was writing articles like, no, this is not going to work.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. But I grant everybody about a month. There was about a month. The day I knew and the day I started changing my tone was 15 days. Once we hit the 15, and then everybody started saying the phrase, the new normal. Everybody started saying it. You could see it across cable news. You could see it on every TV commercial if you were watching Nick at Night or a cartoon. Suddenly, everybody, no, we're not going to shake hands anymore. You're going to wear a mask forever. You're going to this, that. So that was when I immediately changed. I completely changed. I was living in Los Angeles at the time, which was as bad as it got in terms of the regulations and lockdowns and nonsense.
I remember that Gavin Newsom and his bullshit.
I mean, Gavin Newsom, I genuinely believe that this man is evil, like a truly evil human being. It would be a sort of Jordan Peterson version of it would be, the truth is good. If you act in complete diametric opposite of the truth all the time, you basically are evil. And that's really what I think.
Audience members, this is the governor who imposed mask mandates while having VIP dinners in private, indoors, with no masks.
With lobbyists. It wasn't just that. It was with lobbyists at French Laundry, which is one of the 10 most expensive exclusive restaurants in the United States. He also managed to keep his own winery in Northern Cali open while he closed other wineries. Yeah. This guy is just bad news. I could do that all day long. But I was in LA. We had these draconian lockdowns. There was a specific day where they had opened up. If you remember back in June of, I guess it was 21, maybe it was 20 at that point, we had opened up for about 2 weeks where they suddenly let you out a little bit more. And then suddenly, and remember, this is LA where it's basically 80 and sunny every single day. And then they had a meeting. The council people had a meeting, and this woman by the name of Sheila Kuhl was the deciding 3-2 vote to close down outdoor restaurants again. And what did she do after she decided to vote? She literally went out to eat at her favorite Italian restaurant in Santa Monica because the order wasn't going to go into effect for 12 hours or something. That was the day that I completely snapped. I ended up protesting. There was a massive protest at her house. I went to that. That was exactly where I signed the recall for Gavin Newsom, which then I'm very proud that I was a big part of. It did not go well, but my friend Larry Elder ran a heck of a campaign, and I was out there with him. But I was never for mandates. I was never for forcing anyone to do anything. I said many times on my show, I've got my staff is in studio with me, and the idea that me as an employee would have dominion over their personal medical choices is completely insane. I happen to be my own boss, so that's nice. But that I could say to them, hey, Daphne, you have to get injected with this experimental thing. They just ran it through, and Operation Warp Speed, we don't know if it's really tested. By the way, mRNA and changing viruses, that's a little weird, but you have to do that to work for me. I just knew it was complete nonsense. And then I think, and maybe this gets us to something a little bit bigger or more philosophical in a sense, I think it started filling people with a sense of purpose in a bizarre sense. People that were just kind of going on throughout the day. They didn't know why they were doing what they were doing. And we'd all become so comfortable scrolling this stupid thing all day that suddenly they loved having this power over people. And the anger that it brought to people, walking my dog in LA and literally people would be pulling the dogs apart, because they thought we were standing too close. I would go into stores and try not to wear a mask. I'd be yelled at repeatedly. And then one day I was just like, that's it. Well, actually, I know the day. 3 days after the recall, which failed, I got audited by the state of California. Talk about government overreach.
Wow.
That was the day I put my house for sale and I moved to the free state of California almost 3 months later to the day.
You moved you moved out of California.
I'm sorry, to the free state of Florida. Free state of California. I need more coffee. Jesus.
All right. So now you're living in Florida. So you left California over all that bullshit. Now you're living in Florida.
I left. I took 2 companies out there, about 20 total employees. And I got to tell you, Florida is flourishing like you would not believe. And it's not just the economy, and it's not just the fact that we fund our police and it's safe on the streets and that we're building incredibly fast. It's the spirit of freedom that is here. The joy in people that is here. Especially, I'm here in Miami where, we have a ton of Cubans and Venezuelans, people that either first, second, or third generation fled communism and fled socialism. So I am in such a place that is filled with people who love freedom. And I think it's made me better at what I do as a job. I think it's made me a better person, a better parent. And it's a different country. Let's put it that way. Cali and Florida, I know they're both part of the United States, but in essence, they're different countries.
Florida basically, from very early on, resisted a lot of these mandates, didn't it, as a state? I mean, it kind of started initially to go down that track, but then very quickly became one of those states that symbolized the opposite of what the rest of the U.S. was doing.
Yes, absolutely. And you also have to remember Florida. I mean, think of what the cliche of Florida is. Cliche of Florida is, oh, that's where old people go to die. That's Golden Girls country, right? It's the second oldest population in the United States. You would have thought that their COVID numbers would have been crazy.
Yeah.
But not only were they not crazy, but DeSantis went out of his way to respect people's rights to take choice of, have choice in their own lives, make their own decisions over their own lives. He kept schools open. Now, yes, everybody locked down at the beginning. But what I'm impressed by are politicians, and not just politicians, people who get new information and then do the right thing. Do the right thing. And we have so few people who did that. And that's why I think what DeSantis is doing here in Florida is now being replicated across the country, not just on COVID policies, but things like school choice, which he was a big leader of here, is now being replicated in Arkansas and Iowa and Montana and a bunch of other states. So this right now is the epicenter of freedom in America. And the question is, can you replicate that? Or as he would say, can you blueprint that so that the other states actually start doing the right thing? Because guys, and Maajid, I've been following you long enough and watched, your whole traverse through this thing. They will bring this back to some degree, whether it's COVID-6 or it's monkeypox again, or whether it's climate lockdowns or whatever. This was just a test run. Everything's kind of a test run. And they'll bring it back, and a whole bunch of people will say, yes, please lock me down even harder. But it ain't going to happen here.
I remember back when, trying to take this, because so much has happened, trying to take this bit by bit as we discuss. Back when the elections were going on and Trump was claiming election interference, of course, you and I were texting, Dave. Do you remember that?
I do.
Because it felt like, it was crazy. It felt like, in addition to everything else that was on the horizon with COVID and what have you, even the Hunter Biden laptop in itself, it felt like when that was buried, it felt like elections would permanently, I remember at the time, it felt like elections would permanently be affected by this kind of politicized interference. And we were texting and exchanging texts to try and work out where the world goes from here. But what are your thoughts on how much has changed since then? Because what we were texting about, I could probably think of a handful of people that would see at that time that the Hunter Biden laptop was not only genuine, but that its suppression was election interference on a huge scale. Now, pretty much people are acknowledging, everyone's acknowledging that. But talk to me about your reflections of the change from that time to now.
Yeah, well, my general position on the Hunter Biden laptop and the election stuff was, look, the machine lies to us about everything. They lie about literally everything, whether it's COVID or whether it's January 6th, or whether it's the Covington kids are racist, or Kyle Rittenhouse is a white supremacist, or Donald Trump said very fine people on both sides. The list of things
just a genuine manifestation of anti-racism activism.
Right, right. So the point is they lie about everything. So I always view everything with an extremely skeptical eye. And those of us that have been, I think we can all include ourselves in this. If you're an internet creature, which we all are becoming to some degree or another, you see these trends, you see these patterns. So when the Hunter Biden laptop stuff was leaking out and they were starting to, you could see images of him smoking crack and it looked like hookers back there and all of this stuff, I was like, there's obviously something here. And then the fact that Twitter, where we knew already that Twitter was shadow banning the hell out of all of us, and they were, my account, I believe it was July 21st of 21. I was banned on Twitter for saying that vaccines were not working as promised and that mandates were coming. It was very obvious to me that both of those things were true. I was banned on Twitter for that. Well, subsequently, flash forward a year and a half, 2 years, we now know because of the Twitter files that Twitter and the government were absolutely working together to silence people. So all the trends were there related to Hunter Biden laptop. It doesn't even matter which incident was first or last or whatever. We had enough pieces on the board where it was like, okay, these people lie about everything. Why would they not lie about this? I would say, to answer your question very specifically, though, in terms of election interference and all that, look, the Atlantic wrote a crazy piece about how they didn't steal the election, they fortified it. Yeah. The entire machine came crashing down on Trump. If you remember on election night, and people can find the video, I was on air with the Daily Wire guys, so Ben Shapiro and those guys for the election. And at about 11:30 Eastern time, so that's New York time, Trump was winning by a lot, and he was winning in there were like 7 remaining states that were kind of up for grabs at that point. He was winning in all of them, then a pipe burst in Philly. Next thing you know, they suddenly announce out of nowhere, we're going to stop all the counting, blah, blah, blah. Look, I don't know what the truth is. I don't know that anyone fully knows. I did a show with Rudy Giuliani last week, and he fully believes 100% without question that the election was stolen. I do not know that. But what I do know is that the corporate media lies about virtually everything. And if you are willing to look in that direction, you will find far more truth if you are willing to just snoop around a little bit than just by swallowing what they say on CNN, MSNBC, and everything else. And just one more quick thing on this, Trump is running again. And one of the things that I have said about Trump many times now is if he believes that the election is stolen, which he clearly does, and I've heard him say it many, many times, if he believes that, then the only way his campaign makes any sense for 24 is if he's done something about it. Otherwise, they'll just do it again. And this is where I think the rhetoric of Trump and the action of Trump are disconnected. I don't know that he's done anything. So to just complain about it and say, I'm running again, well, dude, they stole it from you once, if that's what you believe. You have some work to do. I don't know that he has the right people around him to actually do that work.
It would be incredible if after everything that's transpired, it was attempted again when he runs. But especially if he were up against a Biden, I just don't understand how it could be sold to the people that Biden, after everything that has transpired, would beat Trump this time around in a free and fair election. But let's see what happens. It would just
but Maajid, you got to remember, I mean, this is a guy, that supposedly Biden got 81 million votes basically without campaigning. Yeah. Trump got 75. I mean, that's, again, if you're believing what they're telling us, that's another problem for Trump, because where are the new Trump voters? There's nobody that suddenly is like, oh, now I get it about Trump, I'm going to vote for Trump. It just doesn't really make sense. To me, we've seen the ceiling on Trump. And not to say, look, Biden's been absolutely horrible. I will support whatever Republican ends up as the nominee without question. I mean, there's no daylight there. But we sort of know that Trump can't get more than that. I think DeSantis is a guy that can get all sorts of new people. DeSantis is a guy who won by 30,000 votes in 2018, won by 1.6 million here in Florida in this last election. And he's getting the crossover people, the disaffected libs. I've talked to Bill Maher about this. Those are the types of people that I think are there's not many people that can really move when it comes to voting. You have your hardcore Democrats, your hardcore Republicans. The disaffected liberal, which you and I know a bit about, those are the people that I think still can be moved. And I think DeSantis is the guy to move them.
Well, let me get to DeSantis and Trump in a second, but coming back for a moment to Sam, after what we've just discussed there, after this entire timeline from, say, the election interference to now, there hasn't been a major stance that the COVID skeptical sort of those on the COVID skepticism side haven't got correct, whether it's on masks, whether it's on lockdowns, the failure of mandates, vaccine mandates, the failure of the vaccines themselves to stop infection and transmission. I'd go so far as to say, because I stuck my neck out on this one, the war on Ukraine, there hasn't been a single major topic that they haven't been correct on. Have you, since this time has passed, have you spoken to Sam at all about any of this? Has it sort of, or has the communication completely stopped altogether?
No, unfortunately, it stopped. Look, the last time I spoke to him, I still lived in LA. It was a quick text thing a little bit before I moved. Again, I'm not in the bit. I didn't get into this for friendship, and I also don't beg for friends. I am not angry at Sam. I hope the tone that I'm talking about this with makes that very clear. I'm disappointed in a friendship there. But and if we cross paths again, and I hope we do one day, I hope it would be cordial and everything else. Look, he made a lot of missteps, but this is politics. This is culture. People screw up a lot of stuff. I've screwed up a bunch of stuff. I don't think people are walking around, if you're walking around with the scorecard going, how many times did this guy screw up? And that's the break point for the friendship. That's not a lot of fun. I think you didn't even mention it, but I think one of Sam's sort of real misstep moments was when Jack Dorsey banned Trump from Twitter, and Sam tweeted at him saying thank you. And it's like, now knowing everything we know about Jack Dorsey, everything we know about elections, everything we know about Twitter, like, why would you thank a technocrat for banning and stepping on the free speech of the leader of the free world, whether you like him or not? But again, that doesn't, okay. So Sam and I had a difference of opinion on that. It just doesn't matter. Look, I think a lot of this, again, it boils down to that for the people that really went all in on the over-the-top Trump hate, their whole worldview became relative to what Trump thought about something. So if Trump thought something, it would, because in essence, they were calling him Orange Hitler. And you can't suddenly be like, Hitler got a couple things right. Maajid, you can watch a video that I did. I didn't even have a studio yet. We were building out my studio. It was 2 days after Trump got elected. Maybe it was the next day after Trump got elected. I'm doing a video off my phone in the backyard. You can hear construction in the background. And what I kept saying, having not voted for Trump, but now Trump is president, I kept saying, guys, why don't we all take a moment here and give him a little grace? Because if we do not, and if we call him Hitler and all of this stuff, it's not what you're doing to Trump, and it's not what you're doing to his supporters. It's what you're doing to yourself, because you're painting yourself into a corner. You can't scream, everybody's Nazis, half the country's white supremacists, Hitler's in charge. Because what if, I swear to you, I said this, you can find the video. What if we don't get into new wars? What if the economy's doing well, et cetera, et cetera? Well, then you can't turn around. Boy, that Hitler, he's nailing it on a couple things. He's not that terrible. And I think that's what happened to a lot of people, their whole worldview. And I think there's a connection here to atheism, to be quite honest with you. Atheism is not a worldview. It is a lack of a belief in a deity. Okay, fine. But I think you need something else to believe in. That would get to, many of the debates that he had with Jordan Peterson over this. And Jordan's argument was, Sam, you believe in something, whether you believe it or not. And I think people basically ended up believing Trump was evil. And that became the sort of main focus. Thus, you end up with a lot of these positions on things that didn't really add up.
It's interesting.
Sorry, David, I just wanted to ask the question there about what are the ramifications of, you've made a few points there with COVID, the misinformation there. We've got an election that basically has been, if we look at the facts of it, there's parts of it that look like they've been rigged. And then if you take the entire whole of this, and then we take the fact that with the IDW before as well, we had, there was a level of the one-stop shop set up for information where a lot of what I would call generalization was coming out as well, even though it was obviously, if you're listening to something from what I call an analytical rather than a systems perspective, you get one sense of the story, and and if that's your outlet, and what we've got now is that post-COVID, we've had a cognitive shift where we've got ubiquitous outlets now. Yeah, we've got conspiracy theorists that COVID was a conspiracy, so the earth is flat. And then you've got everyone going into religious conservatism that used to be a new atheist, for example. Do you see what I mean? I just wanted to, because the thing is, we're picking out little problems, but then when we look at it from a whole systems perspective, you start. If I was to look at it as a systems perspective, the arm, the leg, the fingers, I'm looking at it and going, "Oh, we got a bit of a problem here." Do you see what I mean? Just wanted to ask you that question because there's a lot of issues that have propped up there. So
go on, Dave.
Yeah, well, basically, I think what you're saying is there's all these pieces, all these weird things have happened over a couple of years. Now we have a plethora of outlets to talk about these things and everything else. I mean, really, just think 20 years ago, there was no way to do what we're doing right now. We had, for decades in America, we had network news, say ABC, NBC, CBS, all on at 6:30 p.m. You watch the news, they basically covered the exact same thing. It just depended whether you like Dan Rather or Peter Jennings or Tom Brokaw. I'm sure you guys had your same version of this, obviously, in the UK. And then, of course, we got cable news. So now you had CNN 24 hours a day. Then we get Fox, we get MSNBC. It starts widening. Now we have 20 years of the internet where you can, all day long, you can be basically scrolling on this thing, figuring out what is true to you and all of that stuff. We all end up with our own truth, although that's not really true. There is only the truth, not all of our own truths. But really, I think what you're talking about is there's been a real shift in the paradigm right now. It's one of the things that I've been talking about on my show a lot, even from a political perspective. I think what's happening to the world right now is we had 20 plus years of this, about 25 years of phones and connectivity and social media, which made us less social, and a whole bunch more. And what that has done is it has ushered in a new world, but the old world is still holding on. And I think the challenge for all of us is, what is the good stuff from the old world? Individual rights, human freedom, things of that nature. And how do we take that with us to a new world that will be largely digital, hopefully decentralized, less, authoritative news because they spew it out and you have to listen to it, and more of a plurality of voices. These things are completely at odds with each other. Look what Elon Musk is doing with Twitter. I don't know if you guys saw his Tucker interview last night, but he is at war right now with the mainstream media. Yeah. That is good. We needed the world's richest man to call out the BS of the CBC state broadcaster in Canada and NPR here in America and the rest of it. So we're getting, we're getting new allies right now, and we need a full paradigm shift. To relate this to Trump for just a second, I think another one of his problems right now, and again, I supported the guy. I happen to like him personally. I like his kids. But he comes from the old world, and we need to let the old world, not all of it burn, but we need to let a segment of it, we need to let go of it. He's obsessed with the mainstream media. Well, we're never going to get past this until we realize that we have to let go of the mainstream media. We can't keep feeding the thing that is giving us constant misinformation. I could never, you guys could never, if you spent the rest of your waking hours on this mortal coil deciding to lie to your audience about things, you could never catch up to the amount of lies that are spewed by MSNBC or CNN. It is virtually everything that they put out there is a lie or an obfuscation or a confusion of truth. So we have to figure out, what do we want to take from the old world? I mentioned some of the things. And how do we usher that into a new world that, as I said, hopefully will be more decentralized. It will be more in line with human freedom. This is the challenge that we have. And I think there's probably spiritual answers to that. I think there's economic answers to that. And hopefully we'll figure out a way to do that holistically, but it's going to be bumpy. It's been bumpy.
Let's get to Trump, because he's been indicted as well. And when I first asked you to come on, it was actually just after the indictment. And let me see if I can play a quick clip of Trump and something he said. Give me a second. Put it up. Right. We should have that on the screen. And what we're going to do is turn the volume up on this and have it.
Nancy Pelosi,
have it start again.
the rule of law is a tremendous threat to Western civilization. And I was asked the other day, and I took a little heat for it. They said, who's our biggest threat? Is it China, sir? Or is it Russia? I said, no, our biggest threat are high-level politicians that work in the United States government, like Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, Schumer, Biden, Justice Department, because that's poisoning our country. I can do things with China. I made the greatest trade deal in history with China. I don't even talk about it because sometime after that, fairly shortly, what happened with COVID, it was like I didn't want to talk about a trade deal.
So soon after that speech, in which he, as you heard, says that the biggest threat isn't China, isn't Russia, but it's our own establishment, our own deep state, our own globalists in power, those that he says stole the election from him. In other words, we've got to look inward and not look at the world in anger, perhaps a critique of neoconservative foreign policy. But soon after that, he was indicted. So talk to us about that from your perspective, being somebody that's been following this very closely. What on earth is going on? How does that not backfire on the Democrats? And then we'll come to DeSantis as well, because he's part of the mix as well.
Sure. So first off, just generally speaking on the indictment, it's a complete sham. Most of these things, their time where they could have been prosecuted has passed. They were mostly misdemeanors that this guy, Alvin Bragg, who's a George Soros-funded DA. It is true. It is not anti-Semitic to say that. George Soros is no friend of the Jews, by the way. All of this has been trumped up, and this is purely political. It is very obvious. I don't think anyone watching this doesn't think that if Trump wasn't running, they would have let this go. But he's running, so they have to do damage to him. Now, ironically, in the short term, the polls have borne it out. They've actually helped Trump. I don't think that will last over time. And, you know, anyone that is involved in legal hearings, it grinds you down. They don't even have the next hearings now till December 4th, I think. So they're dragging this thing out. They want the show to go on. And, you know, he also has a whole bunch, supposedly, of indictments coming from Georgia that I'm told have way more teeth than these New York ones. So Trump has a whole bunch of headaches. However, I just want to say, even though I've already expressed some of my frustrations with Trump lately, this is a complete sham. This is banana republic stuff. It offers no grace to the system. You know, a democracy only works if people believe that it works. Once you start basically indicting former presidents, you know what happens? We already have a very thin pool of people of good people who are willing to go into politics, because politics is so destructive and so personal, and what they'll do to your family and the lies and everything else. So it's already a slim amount of people that will do it. Well, now if you say to that already slim amount of people, hey, by the way, when you're out of office, there's a good chance we're going to put you in jail. Well, you know what happens? Maajid, it's probably a little bit like where you came from. Suddenly, the guy who had one term, 2 terms, suddenly he's been in power for 30 years, because he realizes if he steps down and he leaves, they're going to do what they did to Gaddafi, for example, in Libya. Obviously, that's different than Egypt, but that they will literally chase him down and stick a knife up his ass, and that'll be the end. I mean, that's what they did to Gaddafi. So, but you know, this is how you end up with a guy like Mubarak in Egypt. For 30 years, he was somewhat friendly to the West, but he also knew the day that he steps down, which ultimately is what happened after Tahrir Square, he steps down, next thing you know, he's in the hospital, he's dead. Like, that's basically how this works, and we need to really step back from the brink here, because what else will be left with? Who in their right mind would say, you know what, I'll go out there and fight for freedom and really fight for American values, and I will put my butt on the line, my family, our reputation, my freedom. I will put all of that on the line for a country that maybe, because of the political wins when I'm out, is going to have some, you know, ridiculous indictment to throw me in jail. That will lead us to a very, very bad place. So again, for whatever my frustrations are with Trump right now, this is really bad news for America. And I would go out and guess that just like Mar-a-Lago, the raid, just like January 6th, the hearings, just like impeachment 1 and impeachment 2, nothing will come of this. I don't think Donald Trump will end up in jail. Yeah. But the show is the part that I think does damage to the everyday person.
I think for the reasons you articulate, nothing can come of this, because if something were to come of this, as you said, it destroys the republic permanently. So nothing physically, nothing can come of this. Otherwise, it's the end of any, as you've mentioned, of any president ever being willing to let go of office, because they will always know that there can be their political opponents can take political revenge against them. It incentivizes tyranny. This does. That's, I think you've summarized it well there. So on that front, it probably means that Trump will beat this just because there's no other option for anybody that actually thinks that the system needs to continue working.
Right. The other option is much worse than Trump as president. Let's put it that way.
So, yeah. So in which case
I wonder if Sam would agree with that, actually.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah. In which case he becomes the front runner for the Republicans. How does DeSantis fit into that then? If he beats this, current polls are indicating that he will become the Republican front runner. How does DeSantis come into this? Why can DeSantis not wait for the final Trump term and then have his two terms after that? What's going on there?
Well, first off, on that part of the question, you know, you only get your shot once. Rudy Giuliani was once a front runner to be president, you know, about 15 years ago. That didn't go anywhere. Chris Christie was once front runner. Scott Walker. I mean, I could name a bunch of names that are irrelevant to an audience largely in the UK because these people never became what people thought they were going to become.
Yeah.
From where I sit as a Floridian for a year and a half, I live in the freest place literally in the world. I live in a place that is flourishing culturally, economically, with, you know, the lowest crime we've had in decades, virtually no homeless people. Everything is working here. It goes back to that culture of freedom we talked about at the beginning. And that is largely because Ron DeSantis, in the midst of the chaos, stood up and said, we will not do this. He just said no. And then by doing that, it caused a whole bunch of people. Florida has had an influx of almost 1 million people in 3 years. 1,200 people move here a day. The biggest problem that Florida has right now is a function of its success. Housing prices are exploding because so many people are moving here. This is what you would call a good problem to have, but it is a problem nonetheless. And I've talked to him about it. And they're escalating infrastructure projects so that they can build faster. And they're cutting some regulation and things of that nature. But so very clearly on the last part of your question, you get your shot once. So that's why you don't wait. That's number one. Number two, to get to what we were talking about a moment before about all of those pieces on the board, DeSantis, he's younger than me. I'm 46 years old. I think he's 45 if I'm not mistaken. He's Gen X. He's right in the rough age frame that the three of us are in. Yeah. It's supposed to be somebody younger.
We're the same age, 45.
There you go. So it doesn't have to be someone 45 or 46, but it does have to be, I think this time, someone say between 40 and 65. Someone that remembers the world before the internet, but grew up with some level of internet and now is just younger and more vibrant, on top of the fact that he's a good family man and all of that. But also what he's done here in Florida, it's not just the COVID thing. He has done everything right. He has pushed the woke stuff out of schools. You know, Maajid, what brought us together way back when, which again seems like many lifetimes ago, it was because we were fighting collectivism in essence. We were fighting this new collectivism that the left had embraced, the left that used to be for civil liberties.
Identitarianism.
Right. Became, as you were the one that coined it, and people always gave me credit, but Maajid Nawaz was the one that said regressive left first. That's what brought us together. But that thing, that regressive attitude of collectivism, that really is what wokeness is, that you should just be judged on your skin color and your genitals and all that stuff. That is now fully embedded in our institutions. It's fully embedded in the Democratic Party. It's fully embedded in virtually everything, to the point that during COVID, in places like Seattle, they were giving vaccines based on skin color. Literally, go Google it if you don't believe me. And DeSantis has fought it all and fought it effectively. He's fighting ESG in our government institutions here and our banks. The woke stuff, the gender stuff, the race stuff. Again, our economy, we have no state taxes here. We're doing everything right. So this guy has modeled it. I think if we want to get, and to add to one other thing we talked about earlier, if we want to get past the BS of the mainstream media, all of the lies, you need someone who's not going to feed it. Do you know that Ron DeSantis right now is refusing to talk to NBC News because they have lied about him so many times that he basically has said, until you guys retract these lies, and they've laid out what the lies are, I will no longer talk to you. That's how you starve the beast. That's in stark contrast to Trump, who the media will lie about him every day, and then he'll come rushing right back to them, thus reinvigorating them. So I think that's a fundamental piece of this. We will not defeat this cultural monster and this globalist monster and everything else unless we start saying no more. We do not need NBC and MSNBC and the CBC and maybe the BBC. We do not need them anymore to lie to us. But we have to have a leader in place who's willing to make that move. And I think that's a big piece of what the appeal of DeSantis is.
So as you will know with me, I try not to take sort of politically endorsing positions in that way, but always I'm interested in the issues that underlie them. And so none of the topics that you've raised in the terms of the stances that he's taken, none of those I would disagree with. I mean, that his campaigning against the mandates, I remember it at the time because it was before my cancellation, just before my cancellation from LBC. And
congratulations on that, by the way. I don't know that I ever formally congratulated you.
I remember citing him as one of the examples of a governor that was pushing back against these mandates. Of course, you'll remember Sweden never having lockdown, and there were very few people we could point to at the time. And that's why I say credit where credit's due. Is always important for me to do that, regardless of where one stands on the political spectrum. But on some of the concerns around DeSantis, I think it is important to mention some of the big money that's come into his campaign has been a lot of the same big money behind a lot of previous big money in politics. And some people are concerned about that. Some people are concerned about his foreign policy stances, his position towards Iran, and perhaps the diplomacy versus non-diplomatic schools of thought as to how to treat Iran, and his history in Guantanamo Bay and allegations of his complicity in what happened with some of the abuse of prisoners there. Have you looked into any of that stuff with regards to him?
So first off, let me just be clear on something. Obviously, I support the guy and I like the guy personally and politically. I'm not a campaign. First off, he hasn't announced.
Yeah.
So there's no campaign to talk of specifically, but I'm also not a surrogate. I'm not paid by them in any way. Yeah. I'm just telling you what my personal feelings are.
I assume as much anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I just think it's important to say, because otherwise it seems like I'm like sort of acting as his lawyer. Look, as for some of that stuff, you have to remember when he was in Congress, he was part of the Freedom Caucus with the guys that are the most anti-interventionist that we have, guys like Thomas Massie and Chip Roy, Thomas Massie from Kentucky, Chip Roy from Texas. So he was really on the more libertarian side of that isolationist. Now we don't have time for it. We could have a huge discussion on isolationism versus nation building and all of that stuff, but that's separate. He also gave what I thought was quite a good statement to Tucker Carlson related to the Ukraine war. He slightly walked it back, but you have to understand also is that the guy is the governor of Florida right now. Now we have to figure out if that's going to scale all the way up, and then you have to deal with foreign policy and everything else. I believe this is a guy who has so shown the ability to make the right decisions that I don't expect him to have every answer for every single issue perfected just yet. The guy's trying to run a state, so let this thing scale up, and then he will be involved in international politics a little bit more. By the way, I'll fully give credit to Trump where credit is due. We had peace under Trump. Let's not forget, Russia invaded Ukraine under Obama, right? Took Crimea. They did nothing under Trump. And then now we have this war, not war, under Biden. So Trump deserves total credit for that. Trump deserves total credit for the 4 deals that were signed in the Middle East. And I have no doubt that if Trump had remained president, there were probably, people say there were probably 7 more that were on the way. I wrote about it in my first book. I believe that you should have peace through strength, that's how you actually attain peace, not through acquiescence. So these are all the things that I think he can sort of unfold on the fly a bit more. They don't strike me as major red flags.
I mean, the Ukraine one has caused quite a concern because of that, what you call a tiny walk back. But it's interesting because I think the narrative around Ukraine is very quickly going to change the ground from under his feet. Anyway, but Dave, listen, we've got 2 minutes left with you because I know you have a hard exit in 2 minutes' time. Usman, in these last 2 minutes,
I gotta do my own show, unfortunately. I
know, but
gotta pay the bills around here.
We'll be happy to have you back anytime. You and I have been texting for a long time saying let's make it happen. So I'm glad it finally did happen because of course we've been texting since the days of the infamous laptop incident and the whole
long overdue
US election interference. But Usman, before we let Dave go as well, I want to bring you in and any reflections you have on what you've heard.
Well, I think there's a deeper conversation to have around all of this, but I think we need double the amount of time. But actually, to go into that, I think there's a big issue here where we've got a lot of what I call monopolizing going on with the information sphere. Do you see what I mean? I think what happened if you look at what happened with Sam with this, and I have to admit, look, I like. Previous to all of the madness, there's Sam's put some great nuggets of truth out there, as well as a lot of nonsense as well. But there's been some great nuggets of truth that have come out in some of his writings. But the point has been with this idea of the monopolization of information, this idea of I'm the outlet, because it's like what happens is when you start seeing yourself as that outlet and someone disagrees with you, it can be a problem. Yeah, remember, Maajid, yeah, our work previous to this was what? Informing governments and training special units. So yeah, we're used to that podium where you're giving the information and you're giving, but you're there to take if it makes sense, but you're judging anything you're taking against your own relative experience. Do you see what I mean? Now, the point I'm making here is that I think we're back at that point again with the monopolization of information, because as you said before, David, where you use the example of, I use the example with the tabloid and the broadsheet, I call it. Yeah, the different spheres of information. Yeah, so there's the comic book vernacular versus the fake intellectualism, because it's always analytical. It's always analytical. I mean, if we were going to go deeper into the river and swim that river and start looking at what's going on, you get into different stratas of society and how everything affects the different stratas. But if we're going to inform people, that's the responsibility. And should we be looking at less than a John F. Kennedy? Because this is one thing that I've been talking about over the years. I'm using John F. Kennedy from the example of the icon that us in Britain will know about. Maybe.
So on that very, yeah. I have to squeeze this in because you've got to go. If I have to squeeze this in. So RFK has announced that he wants to run as well. Very quick reaction to that, Dave.
If you want to see how dirty the Dems are, watch the way they treat this guy, because they know that they could never have a primary for Biden because Biden can't say 2 consecutive sentences without talking about corn pop. So they are going to do horrible, horrible things to him. I happen to like RFK a lot. I think he did great on COVID. Guys, I really would love to continue this. And it's so good to see you again, Maajid, and it's great to chat with you. Let's do this again, and we can expand on a whole bunch more of this, and come to the free state of Florida, guys. It's all good here.
I might be there soon. I'll text you and let you know the details. But Dave, thank you very much. This has been Dave Rubin, everybody, on Warrior Creed. Dave, we'll have you back anytime, man. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks,
my pleasure, guys. Thanks. Good seeing you.
Bye-bye. So that was a lot to get through in the 50 minutes we had, but I think we covered quite a lot of ground there. What are your bring you in and get your reflections on this?
Honestly, Maajid, you know me, I'm not about the bullshit. I like to dig into the subject. And I think with the IDW aspect, there's a lot to dig into, because you have to remember, the point I always make with this is your experience since then and opening up that secret chest of experience.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? The stuff that we're seeing it from one level up to the other level, aren't we? We've dealt with governments, we've dealt with security services, and then all the way through to the man right down on the street.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm including with the US. Yeah, we're still in touch with the man right down on the street over there. But the point being with this, that when we're talking about the responsibility of giving information, because that's where we got to in that conversation as well, where we're talking about the mainstream media.
Yeah.
But what is the mainstream media? And this takes us into the other outlets, the other shows. What is the mainstream media? What is the new face of the mainstream media on the digital sphere? What's the acceptable face of it?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be a big question going forward, because as you said, you've got everything from flat earthers all the way through to, I mean, everything is out there now, and people can consume it all equally online. I should mention at this point that joining us in about 10 minutes or so is South Africa's Shabnam Palesa Mohammed, who we've had on a couple of times on this show. We did say we'd be having her on more regularly because she's a favorite of ours, but also I think viewers as well. And she'll be updating us on a few things, because last time Shabnam joined us, she spoke to us about if you remember, Usman, she spoke to us about the amendments to the pandemic treaty and the international health regulations and their ability to declare a global pandemic centrally from the World Health Organization, top down for the whole planet. So there's been some developments on that. It's been debated in the UK Parliament. And in addition, South African politicians have started reacting against it. And the World Council for Health, which Shabnam is founding or co-founding the South Africa chapter for, but we had Dr. Tess Laurie on Warrior Creed as well, who had been key to founding the World Council for Health and is currently officially a co-founder as well as on the steering committee for that organization. Well, Shabnam is the co-founder of the South Africa chapter, but the World Council for Health has also published their policy brief to counter the WHO's monopolization of global health. So Shabnam Palesa Mohammed will be joining us to speak to us on Warrior Creed about all of that in about 10 to 15 minutes. And I said to her, considering that today is the 27th day of Ramadan, the most sacred of days because of the 27th night that precedes it, which was last night, being the likelihood of Laylatul Qadr, or the night of destiny, being on that night, or generally being on any of the odd nights of Ramadan. So we are in the middle of not only the end of Ramadan, but on the most sacred part of it. So I said she could speak to us a bit about how she feels Ramadan has been going in South Africa as well. So that's all coming up. Stay with us. But on the Dave Rubin discussion, so it's interesting. There was a lot there, Usman, wasn't there? Because he was talking, on the one end, we've got the conversation around friendships and how that's been put under strain because of political stances. But I found it really interesting because there wasn't a lot new there that I got from the whole Sam Dave kind of situation. Maybe listeners did, but being in touch with them both, there wasn't much new there that I gained. But what I found interesting was his keenness on DeSantis, because I've got a different view. I think DeSantis, interesting to me, I think, is a lot of the money behind DeSantis I'm concerned about, because I see the same money being behind a lot of it's a big political money that's been behind a lot of the campaigns and candidates that have caused a lot of our problems to date. What's happened is the money's moved, and how it's happened is because big money, big finance, global finance has realized that public opinion has shifted. So what I worry about is they've moved to a candidate for whatever reason they think they can control, but is more in line with the way in which public opinion has shifted. And the reason I mention they think they can control is there are a few indicators here. One is the man was a Navy lawyer in Guantanamo Bay. So he has, with all, as you and I would know, Usman, with all the control that the national security sector brings onto somebody that is sworn to secrecy on certain topics, official secrets and others. You've got you've got so many levers for control from that angle. If you marry that with his stance on foreign policy, his open views on Iran, as well as the Ukraine war, there is cause for concern that this is a president in waiting who has adopted the domestic policies of the anti-COVID or COVID skeptical crowd so as to win their favor for votes, while adopting the foreign policies of more of the same.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, Usman?
Yeah. And without getting into it, it serves a certain brand.
Yeah.
Yeah. Without me throwing it out there but it serves a certain brand of thinking. There's a whole setup there with television channels and speakers there. So what we get with this is we get back to that saying, you know where your bread is buttered.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? And this is the point that I was trying to say that if you do want to be a truth seeker, which has been that fashionable word nowadays, seek the truth. Don't go into your intersectional bubble, because remember the term that was used there, if Sam's being accused of being an atheist, but that doesn't mean he's not religious. He's proved his religion by demonstrating the anti-Trump stance, because religios just means to bind with a group with the same ideology. But if we reverse that round and the finger that's pointing points back, doesn't it? Because it says, okay, DeSantis and all of the ideology that's there is structured into, there's a very specific service that's been given there with media outlets, with speakers, with everything else. And what that then does is it takes the responsiveness of the individual who's seen there's something wrong and says to them, okay, look, here we've got a new status quo for you. We're not talking about solving the problem. All we're talking about here is a new status quo. And that's what's being pitched. post-COVID status quo. And remember, we talked about this during COVID, Maajid. Black swans.
Yeah.
There's always the post-event new status quo. 9/11 had a post-event new status quo. People in the third world are used to they're used to not having the status quo.
Yeah.
They're used to the understanding of the tyrannical government, the genocide, the lack of food on their table, but those aren't brought into the conversations. A status quo is something for the privileged.
Mm.
And what it allows you to do is sit comfortably.
The status quo is something for the privileged.
Yeah, because what you get with this idea here, Maajid, is this, that you get shifted into a state of discomfort.
Yeah.
And as soon as you're in that state of discomfort, you're like, okay, how do I get back to being comfortable again? What do I need to do? Yep. So if we use the analogy of someone whose fingers hurting, they go to the doctor goes, put this cream on. Yep. They're willing to do whatever it takes so their finger doesn't hurt, so they can get back to a state of comfort. Mm. Yep. And that state of comfort is often numb. We're not talking about enjoyment. We're not talking about happiness. We're not talking about contentment. It's numb.
It's a numbness.
It's a numbness.
It's not really comfort.
Yeah. No, that is, yeah.
Or numbness is comfort.
Or numbness, well, yeah. Why do people get hooked on morphine?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's one of the conversations I had with my wife to say to her, okay, why is it that people get hooked on it? And she goes, well, it makes you numb. And then she explained it to me from a psychological perspective of the idea that there's a protection in numbness. There's a protection there. There's a protection in fulfilling your utility without having any interruption, without having. If you're told, okay, go to work, you pay your bill. Your mission is pay your mortgage. Your mission is fulfill this utility. Mm. Yeah, so you just you're the mouse in the wheel, and you can have the pretense of righteousness as well. And the great thing with the news outlets is there's the pretense of righteousness.
Yeah,
but go and help someone. And this is the thing. It's like if we do it from a responsible factor, we're looking at the problems and we're saying, well, actually, guys, remember what we always talk about? We always talk about get together in a physical way as well. Yeah. Go and sit with someone. But the problem with this is, Maajid, this thing here, once again, what were we talking about? We were talking about dinners and intellectual conversations. But the ramifications of dinners and intellectual conversations that go out and then had effects through think tanks, through policies, through everything else, when you had people that were dehumanized outside, because it's a conclusion that's come to. You can come to a conclusion. You can put the point out about the conclusion, but the conclusion's always attached to a generalization. And because people work from a posture of generalization, rather, no one wants to think from a systems point of view, from a nuanced perspective. They want to think from a generalized perspective. Hence, we've got intersectionality. Intersectionality even gives you your victimhood. It literally sells a generalized state of thinking. And this is the problem we've got nowadays, because now we've got the prophets of generalization who are even appropriating our methodology, Maajid. Like I sent you the character's name who was symbolism in religion.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, what is this?
That's interesting, but that's all part of the same. See, that character that you've just referenced is in it as well, has put their weight behind the entire train that is currently headed in the DeSantis direction.
Exactly.
That entire train. So there's a whole scene out there of people that we're very civil, friendly, and in touch with.
Yeah.
But they have decided to back quite, as we just heard again on this with Dave, they've decided to back quite vocally the DeSantis train. And prior to that, they were on the Trump train. And I've noticed that shift is very interesting. And it probably enrages Trump because he is rumored to have like loyalty, and he doesn't see this as very loyal of DeSantis. But it's interesting that what you've got is a candidate that on the domestic issues has basically adopted all of those very, very early on, adopted all of those topics that the people that were skeptical of COVID and all, he's adopted all those lines. But because it's us ultimately, Usman, right? Those that were skeptical of COVID is people like us, right? We are also skeptical of, say, wanting war in Iran.
Yeah.
We're also skeptical of all those topics. And
but the point is with this, Maajid,
we're also skeptical of Guantanamo. And I don't know where DeSantis stands on the war on terror stuff, on the foreign policy war mongering, war hawk sort of stuff. And I worry, in fact, when I say I don't know where he stands, I'm being polite, because I do know where he has stood, and it's not good.
That's why I wanted to connect this point before I lost it, which was when I was over in LA speaking to the head of LA counterterrorism, and we're about to do training, and he explained to me about, and that was when Trump was in, remember, Maajid, and he goes, look, you're not going to get very far with this humanization, because he'd been in a room where Sebastian Gorka had got up and he said, Islam is the greatest threat to America. Yeah. So this is, and you remember Gorka was one of the first supporters in those days. Now, the reason I'm talking like this is because I'm saying, look, remember my point, Maajid? I said, look, I haven't got a problem with you until there's victims. Yeah, I always had the same thing with, remember, even with those extremists that I was dealing with, I used to say to them, I go, look, you're talking nonsense right now, but that's fine. As long as there's no victims right now, it's fine. But as soon as you've done stuff where there's victims, there's ramifications now.
Yeah.
Yep. Now, the point is with this that we saw a lot of victims. And our prisons are full of a lot of individuals that became reactionaries towards what happened during that period.
Who were victims and then went on to victimize others.
And went on to victimize others, but also like literal victims that came out of the dehumanization and the generalization. Remember, whoops, we've dropped a bomb on an Afghan wedding.
Yeah.
It's just, sorry.
Yeah.
Yep. But the problem is when you're sitting with people, the story I told you, when I was sitting with the guy at Regent's Park Mosque, the Afghan, he's sitting there eating his fish. We're all having a nice hoo-ha there. We're eating our food and laughing. And we just turn around to this Afghan guy and we say to him, oh, brother, where are you from? And he goes, Afghanistan. He goes, oh, what's it like over there? And then he told us the story about how he went to go and get water. He had 2 buckets there, and he explained how he had it around his neck, 2 buckets he's holding. And he goes, it's a mile or a couple of miles to the well. He goes to the well, he's filling up the water, and then he sees a bomb drop.
Yeah.
And it wiped out his entire family. And he was just quiet, and our whole table went quiet. And you're looking at the guy, you can't say anything to him. He just went back to, the way they eat the fish because it's got so many bones in it. You have to concentrate. He just went back to eating his fish.
Yeah, it's tragic.
And this is what I'm talking about, Maajid, that you can't, if we're going to talk about reality is very different.
Yeah.
Because we can,
I think that's what they learned eventually in Afghanistan anyway, with the absolutely shameful cut and run that Biden was engaged in when he pulled everybody out there. They learned reality is very different, and you can't really resist reality for so long. To quote Mike Tyson, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face.
But you know what happened with these guys, Maajid? Have a look at the paperwork.
Yeah,
they made their billions and they got out. Whoever was in there, these companies made their billions. They got out, and I'm no supporter of the Taliban yet, but the fact is that what you get over there is you get warlords that are brought back in. Remember, I dealt with special forces individuals who served out there, and they explained to me about how as soon as the guys that they're dealing with, some of these guys had little kids that they were raping nightly.
That's right.
That these Afghans.
No, I mean,
with the Bachabazi.
The military bases there had that involved. There have been reports that have come out where that was happening on Western military bases in Afghanistan as well.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I've got to bring Shabnam in because she's been waiting in the waiting room. So let's bring Shabnam in to discuss the World Council for Health and the updates with the international health regulation amendments. Welcome, Shabnam Palesa Mohammed. It's a pleasure to have you back on from South Africa.
Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you. It's wonderful to be back on. You'll notice I tried to match your naming convention there and added the catalyst
nice.
before my name.
That's good. I didn't see that. Now I do. The catalyst, Shabnam Palesa Mohammed. So listen, there's a few things I wanted to talk to you about, and we'll end with how Ramadan is going because it's the 27th, and I know that in South Africa as well that means a lot to people. But let's start with. I want to share something for the viewers. So let me put it up. It's the World Council for Health have released some policy stances to counter the monopolization of health. So we'll pull that up on the screen. It should be there. We are. We have it there. So this is it's a new press release from the World Council for Health. World Council for Health issues policy brief to counter the WHO's monopolization of global health. And just read the first para there. It says, World Council for Health Policy Expert Group urges the rejection of some of the submitted amendments to the International Health Regulations 2005 and the WHO Draft Pandemic Treaty to counter monopolization of global health. So, Shabnam, do us a favor, talk us through what we're seeing here and why it's so important.
So this policy brief, as is described there, has come out of an expert group within the World Council for Health, which has been spotlighting the power grab by the WHO since at least 2021, the WHO being the tip of the spear and not, of course, the entire spear. And so this policy document is a 45-page document that explains the issues, to put it mildly, with giving an unelected bureaucratic behemoth the right to make decisions on our behalf when it comes to not only our health, but now also national sovereignty. The amendments to the IHR, as well as the proposed new pandemic treaty, would give the WHO's Director General, for example, the authority to declare a public health emergency of international concern, even if your country disagrees. As James Rogaski, our friend and colleague, would have shared with you in your previous show, Maajid and Usman, going into the detail of these amendments, it's very clear that the pharmaceutical industrial complex, which in fact runs the WHO through funding, would profiteer through amendments to the IHR and the proposed new pandemic treaty. But it actually goes beyond that. If you really analyze it from a geopolitical perspective, it's medical colonialism through utilizing instruments such as treaties and agreements, not a new practice, but certainly one that more people are becoming aware of now that we face the tyranny of absolute trauma during the last 3 years, or perhaps better called terrorism of the last 3 years. And so this document, which is concise and yet comprehensive, it strikes an excellent balance. There's the first 5 pages is essentially the most important part. It's a summary of the argument why we don't actually need, want, or deserve monopoly over our health. That's the core word that's important to understand. It's not only about the WHO. It's a monopoly over our health. It's a monopoly of power through concentration of power and decision-making abilities, whether that's the WHO or it's the World Economic Forum or it's the Bank of International Settlements. What we're actually exposing and resisting and finding alternatives to is monopoly. And monopoly, of course, is an antithesis to democracy. Of course, the subject whether democracy actually exists or not is one we'll have to dedicate an entire show to. But certainly giving any organization or even any government the monopoly to make decisions for us without us is something we need to resist with all our might. But just a proviso and a disclaimer to say that it's not only the WHO that's responsible and culpable for this power grab. It is compromised and captured and corrupt stakeholders and role players within our own countries that are participating in this undemocratic, tyrannical arrangement and trying to make it seem as if these instruments, the amendments or the treaty or whatever accord they're going to come up with, are actually in the public benefit. Yesterday, there was a debate in the UK Parliament. I think it was initiated by Andrew Bridgen, but supported by a couple of other MPs as well, who really made a valiant attempt to explain and to argue why amendments to the IHR, which is our most pressing concern right now, would subvert democracy. And some of the arguments that were made is the WHO has failed miserably during the last 3 years. Why would we want to give them even more power? And if you listen to the response from the other side, it was essentially they just sounded like their political careers were funded by the pharmaceutical or related industries. Things like, it's not that serious. We've still got a long way to go before it's actually voted in, and that could change. Some of the amendments could actually come into place in May 2023, not May 2024. Or we need the WHO because they've got such a fantastic history of looking after our public health, and completely ignored conflicts of interest, to funding, the failures, and the loss of sovereignty. So this document provides information. It also provides recommendations on what countries and civil society even should be thinking about and doing to push back against amendments to the IHR, including education and advocacy, including legislative amendments that need to be made, and going to court if necessary to push back against amendments to the international health regulations. So it's certainly an extremely important and useful document. It's been gaining traction. I've certainly been sharing it with South African politicians as well, and I know that the many partners of the World Council for Health in countries from the north of America to Zimbabwe in the south have also been sharing this document and familiarizing themselves with what it is that we face, and talking about how to build alternatives.
I mean, it's concerning because effectively, after everything we've just lived through, the World Health Organization is demanding power by diktat to rule over the entire planet with health emergencies as and when they see fit. That's effectively what's happening here. And people need to understand that behind the complicated language, the technical terms, behind the legislative debates, behind the time frames, whether it's 24 or 23 that this happens in, effectively, to sum it up for people, this is the important part here. The World Health Organization that just did everything to you that it did during COVID by recommending national governments to lock down, impose mask mandates, impose vaccine mandates, all of that stuff that we've now all come out on the other end of and realized was terrible for us and didn't actually work but made problems worse. The World Health Organization now wants the power to do that unilaterally, globally, for the entire planet whenever they feel like it. And that World Council for Health policy briefing that we put up on the screen is a response to that. But effectively, that's what it means. So it's really important people understand and digest this. National governments have to reject the amendments to the international health regulations, because those amendments will give the World Health Organization power to rule over the entire planet with COVID mandates or any other kind of virus mandates whenever it wants. Is that a fair summary of it, Shabnam?
That's absolutely a fair summary of it. And, while we do agree that the World Health Organization has done some good work in the past, it's just captured to such an extent that it simply cannot serve the public good and the public health. But beyond that, Maajid, we don't want a one health approach. Yeah. We don't want any other organization or even your government to tell you this is what you need to do to look after yourself to be well. Our governments themselves have failed us. It's not like we can say to our governments, we don't trust the WHO, we trust you. No, we don't trust our governments either. By and large, they've completely failed us during the last 3 years. The parties that spoke out, the politicians that spoke out, have been few and far between. Certainly, we hope that changes, because if they were to vote in support of these amendments or the new pandemic treaty, politicians will become irrelevant, because our sovereignty would be handed over to this corporate called the World Health Organization. Why would we need politicians? And now the United Nations is also making moves to usurp even more power over governance in our countries in terms of, for example, emergencies like the climate crisis. So between the WHO and the United Nations, what sovereignty will we have as countries? I don't think it's quite reached politicians' consciousness that they will become irrelevant. Perhaps that might be the angle that might make them sit up and pay attention. But certainly kudos to those politicians who have spoken out in the UK. And if you have that clip, Maajid, of the South African politician who spoke out last year, this was Reverend Kenneth Meshwe, the leader of the African Christian Democratic Party. And he'd reached out to me last year to say, I know the World Council for Health is doing a lot of work on this pandemic treaty. That's what we were giving all of our focus to then. We've now pivoted to the IHR because we can see the bait and switch. And we managed to reach 415 million people in about 7 days as part of the campaigning. So he read the content, he read our statements, and he said, can you summarize this or make it a little shorter for me because we've got limited time in Parliament. I want to read the statement in Parliament. So that video clip is him reading it and a response from Minister Naledi Pandor from the International Relations Department.
Let's watch this and then get your response to that as well. Here we go.
The ACGP.
Thank you, Chairperson. The World Council for Health, a coalition of scientists, doctors, lawyers, civil society advocacy organizations, and the ACDP, opposes the World Health Organization's move to implement a power grab in the form of a global pandemic agreement while the world's attention is diverted by the Russia and Ukraine crisis. We believe that the proposed World Health Organization's global pandemic agreement is unnecessary and is a threat to sovereignty of nations and the citizens' inalienable rights. It increases the WHO's suffocating power to declare unjustified pandemics, impose dehumanizing lockdowns, and enforce expensive, unsafe, and ineffective treatments against the will of the people. The World Council for Health believes that people have the right to participate in any agreement that affects their lives, livelihoods, and well-being. We are concerned as the ACDP that the World Health Organization has not engaged in any process of public participation. The ACDP believes that without an unbiased democratic process, the global pandemic agreement driven by the World Health Organization will be illegitimate and invalid. The ACDP therefore insists that this parliament must debate this matter, and there must also be a public participation process so that members of the public can make informed decisions about their future and that of their families and future generations.
Your time is up, Honorable Mishra. Thank you. Thank you. Minister Pando.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I wish to respond to the statement by the Honorable Reverend Meshwe on the proposed global treaty on pandemic preparedness, and assure the Honorable Meshwe that should such a document be agreed by member states, we would certainly have to bring it, as we do with all international instruments, to Parliament for deliberation and consideration by our Parliament. So the Honourable Mishwe should not worry that something will be adopted which would not be considered by our elected representatives.
So, Shabnam, it's almost a joke at this stage because, of course, as we know, when it gets to Parliament and they consider it by our elected representatives, I mean, how representative those and how elected those people are is the very point. I mean, look at what happened through COVID. No one was listened to with any criticism. In fact, it was the opposite. Voices were silenced, repressed, suffocated, cancelled, stigmatized, ostracized, vilified. So this idea that somehow these elected representatives are going to find their conscience and love for the people and listen at this late stage in the game is laughable, is it not?
Absolutely. I mean, Naledi Pandor is one of the more respected ministers in South Africa from the Directorate of International Relations and Corporations. But what she says there is, what she's saying is once the treaty has been agreed to, then we'll bring it to Parliament for discussion. How does that work in a democracy? You've got to have public participation. There's got to be a parliamentary process. If the public says yes, then it must go through a parliament process, and then you can sign an international agreement. But the entire thing is upside down, except that it's not broken, it's engineered that way. So for her to have this kind of response is actually quite bizarre. I served following this was in 2022, early 2022. later 2022, towards December, I served what is known in our country as a PIA application, Promotion of Access to Information, commonly known in the US, perhaps the UK, as a FOIA application,
Right.
asking for information
Freedom of
on
information
these
request,
amendments.
basically.
Sorry, what was that, Maajid?
Freedom of information request.
That's right. That's right, which is enshrined in our constitution, one of the most lauded constitutions in the world. And so I asked for information. I'm sorry, someone's going to start construction just above me. Can you hear them?
Wow.
It's 5:25 p.m. They shouldn't be doing that, actually.
Yeah.
Let's hope they stop. So essentially, they never replied to the PIA application. I asked questions about proposed amendments, who are our delegates.
I'm not.
You have one more video to play. Maybe play that one. This is at the Better Way conference last year and a vote on exiting and defunding the WHO. Maybe let's watch that and hope that the drilling.
I have to pull that up. So while I'm pulling
Okay.
it up, yeah.
I'll talk meanwhile. So essentially, we've got no response from her or any of the other ministers that I copied in on that application process in a constitutional democracy. And so what it says to me is that we actually don't have parliaments anymore. We don't have public representatives anymore. Those few that are honest, we have to, of course, work with them. But we certainly need to reconstruct our ideas of what is democracy and what kind of governance we actually want in our countries, because representative democracy doesn't work. It simply does not work. We need direct democracy. And I think perhaps what we've been through in the last 3 years is going to lead us in that direction, because if we don't, what we'll be facing is so much surveillance, it will become completely unimaginable. We'll be facing situations where presidents can say to us, I'm not mandating the injection, the WHO is.
Well, it's coming on. So I'm pulling up that video, but while we pull up the video, let's bring Usman in, and then hopefully we can play the video, and let's hope that this noise goes away, Shabna. But in the meanwhile, what I might do is, if we can put you on mute, so that while Usman's talking, it does come back, we can at least we don't hear the noise. But Usman, on the international health regulations, we discussed it last week. If you remember our guest we had on last week, and it was again for the second segment of the show, because this isn't going away, as you can see. Whether it's South Africa, it was debated in the Parliament here in the UK. It's global. There's actually a global attempt to take over our health security globally and have it declared centrally with the World Health Organization.
Yeah, and it's a terrifying prospect when you already look at the fact that, if you start connecting the dots up, that if you went to travel abroad, you were told, okay, you've got to get this vaccination, that vaccination, and then so over the years we were already used to a certain amount of control, a certain amount of you have to do this to get there. But I think the interesting point that our guest last week made that I wanted him to elaborate on was the point system that he was talking about, Shabnam, where he was saying that you're going into an office and they've got this. There's a system there where they're telling you by a point system of where your health should be, and if it isn't there, they're giving you whatever drug. Do you see what I mean? So the guy's working from a pharmaceutical perspective, and I know this. I had a conversation with another doctor about the fact that things like statins and things like this that are given out, and other natural health remedies, like things like berberine that are simple, that will lower your insulin resistance, aren't looked into. The straight away that you're going to the harder pharmaceuticals, but these harder pharmaceuticals are also attached to industries.
Right.
So what you've got with this is industries that are being fed with fed by a system that's, and within that system itself, the patient comes in with the idea there's something wrong with me, and in order to get rid of that something wrong with me, and doctors talk about this, the patient often wants medicine.
Yeah, let's bring you back in. I've got the video ready as well. So if that noise does return, we will be able to skip to the video. But let's bring you back in on Usman.
Right. So I missed some of that because it's going on in the background, but I just wanted to comment that a president of a country could say, I'm not mandating injections or lockdown. I'm merely following international law. Yeah. And therefore saying, I've got no responsibility, accountability. Don't look at me. We've signed this agreement. We've got to be responsible global citizens. And of course, the international health regulation amendments would change from being voluntary to being mandatory and legally binding. That's part of the amendments that are being proposed. Of course, massive implications. And of course, at the Better Way conference last year in 2023, we focused on this issue of the WHO.
Let's go. Oh, that was a quick one. So if you wrap up your thought, we can go to the video as well. Oh, actually, so that clearly being on mute means that is continuing. So let's go to the video. Voting to defund and exit the WHO. This is from the Better Way conference, featuring Shabnam actually on screen here. So let's play this.
Can I just get a quick vote from everybody here right now? Who thinks we need to defund and exit from the WHO? That's a full house. The people have voted. Thank you very much.
Now, Shabnam, that was a quick video, so I'm hoping that that was the one you're referring to, because either way, if the noise is continuing, we're in trouble. That was only 15 seconds, but is that the video you're
right? No noise currently, but that's exactly the video. It's part of the film on the Better Way conference that you can find on the website betterwayconference.org. It's a 58-minute film, and I was so glad that Oracle Films included that particular clip in the film, because it's that powerful. You didn't see anyone in the room say, I need to think about this. I'm not sure. Maybe I do want the WHO to be making decisions on my behalf. So really very powerful moment and an exercise of real democracy.
And those
people actually having a voice.
And let's be clear who those people are in that audience. I mean, the kind of people that attend the World Council for Health conferences aren't, health illiterate, for example.
Exactly. So we've got doctors, scientists, lawyers, activists, journalists, farmers, natural health practitioners, everyone really, people who really care about their health and well-being. And again, that's what democracy looks like. It's the people making decisions for themselves. And so I think we need to continue that kind of practice in communities and events that we have to raise the kind of questions that are in the political consciousness and have the people vote, to remember what it's like to have a say in your country about your life and your community in your country. We really need to be doing that more often and practice democracy and walk the talk and realize who's actually in charge. They have no power without us, because the power of the people is greater than people in power.
So on last point here, Shabnam, because we're coming to the end of the show anyway, but since we last spoke, RFK has declared, and we just asked our first guest, Dave Rubin, about this as well. So RFK has declared, Robert Kennedy has declared that he wants to run for president of the United States as the Democratic Party candidate. You work with him. So what are your reactions to that, and how do you view that run? Do you think it's going to succeed? What's your view on that?
So I can only give you a personal opinion on that and not in any other capacity. Although I must say, Maajid, I think we need an entire show to unpack the implications of this presidency, this potential presidency. So in my personal capacity only, and as an African, I have expressed the view that RFK Jr. is the US president that Africa and the world need. We know how committed he is to the health and well-being of Africa, like his father was. And there's evidence of that if you read, for example, the Africa chapter in the book, The Real Anthony Fauci, where he exposes the crimes of the pharmaceutical industrial complex on Africans in South Africa, in Nigeria, in Kenya, and it goes on. It hasn't stopped. So he's always had this fondness and regard for Africa. And so I really think he is the US president that that Africans actually need. But in addition to that, if you listen to his interviews, you listen to him speak. I watched an interview he did with Joseph Mercola, for example. And it's very clear that he is anti-war. He is anti the weapons industrial complex. He is anti the militarization of the world. And that is unlike any other US president we've seen in a really long time. So he is pro-people, he's anti-war, he's pro-health, he's for exposing corruption and defeating censorship. But I think his presidency is also about trying to build a bridge between the so-called right and left. I mean, all of that's changed in the last 3 years. It's hard to define who's on the right and who's on the left. But certainly his presidency has the potential to unite Americans again across the two-party political divide on issues that really matter. It's not just about the vaccines. It's about what is the meaning of democracy. What have we experienced over the last 3 years? How do we rebuild this country in a way that not only benefits us as Americans, but also builds our relationships with the rest of the world? In many parts of the world, America is seen as a pariah. And so I think his kind of presidency, which is all encompassing and has an internationalist flavor, will do a lot to restore peace and prosperity around the world.
It's interesting because I think on the foreign policy and the war stuff, I would have more time for his stance on that than I would for DeSantis. We just discussed DeSantis with Dave Rubin because DeSantis has a kind of a war hawk past, having served as a Navy lawyer in Guantanamo Bay, having had a very pro intervention against Iran stance on foreign policy, having been pro-Ukraine war, then trying to walk it back, then trying to walk the walk back. DeSantis is a bit confused on foreign policy at the moment because he knows that his base is against him on some of the stances his big money wants him to take. So RFK could be a very interesting antidote to all that because he has the domestic stances that DeSantis, I believe, has appropriated, but actually also, to be fair to him, came in early on some of them, like mandates, but also has the foreign policy perspective that has been anti-war from the start. But what do you think the Democrats would ever allow another Kennedy?
Another Kennedy who is as vociferous as he is on the subjects that affect their bottom dollar and their pockets, I don't know. It's hard to tell. I mean, there are other Democrats that do deserve some of our respect. People like Bernie Sanders, for example, has been trying for a really long time to make changes, especially in the area of health reform and democracy. But it remains to be seen whether the Democrats will allow it. It appears as if some of them have been captured by the pharmaceutical complex as well. Funding political campaigns is par for the course, and the revolving door is very real. Whether they'll allow it or not remains to be seen. But what I am very certain of is that whether he wins or not, the impact of his attempt at the presidency is going to be absolutely massive and unprecedented.
Yes.
Because you can't censor a potential president, a presidential candidate. So he's going to be able to say everything that he's been censored from saying in so many of these social media platforms and the corporate controlled media for the last couple of years.
That's interesting. Usman, on concluding points before we call it for today, anything that you want to comment?
Shabnam, have you sorted anything out for like the youth? I'm talking about from a level of because that's what I was thinking while I was thinking about my oldest daughter there, and they're on a level where educating the next generation, because that's that next challenge that's there. That I was thinking that's something that the council could look at setting up events and things like that, either online. In fact, what I'll do, Shabnam, is I'll get in contact with you and put my daughter in touch with you to get be something worth organising.
That's an honour. He wants his daughter to meet you. That's a vote in your favour there, Shabnam.
That's a vote in your favour, yeah.
Before you only I wasn't allergic to politics. Thank you. I that means a lot to me.
Before you respond to that as well, let me throw in the last question for you. I want to just acknowledge Ramadan. I was going to play a video, but I wasn't able to. The video you sent me was actually a forward, so I wasn't able to actually just take it. But it doesn't. Okay. But just to acknowledge how Ramadan is going in South Africa, and the 27th night, as I say, is incredibly important. As we've just been through, we're on the 27th day. It's good to speak to you on such an occasion, and also then Eid is coming up as well. What is the Eid vibe in South Africa like? So respond to all of that together and wrap up.
Well, I believe the 27th night is actually tonight for us, but of course we know we seek the odd night in any of the last 10 nights of Ramadan. It's just the other day that Ramadan started, and now we're almost at the end. It's such a special time of the year for Muslims. For me, it's been sharing that experience and explaining what Ramadan is with my non-Muslim friends has really been quite beautiful. The respect has been amazing. The feeling of strengthened spirituality, a greater desire to do more, to give more, to say more, to be more. It's galvanized during this month, and it sustains us for the next 11 months coming up. Number of years ago, when I was diagnosed with essential thrombocythemia, I couldn't fast for a number of years, and it was terribly painful because I was so sick and I was so miserable, and my body couldn't make it to fast, and it was terribly depressing. But Alhamdulillah, since being in remission through the grace of the Almighty and natural treatments, I'm now able to fast again. It's such a beautiful feeling, and to feel more connected with the community. So Eid is in our country. It's difficult. There are many Muslims who are very poor, and so they can't afford the kind of Eids that the rest of the Muslim community can. But Alhamdulillah, there is a great movement of community groups within our country that create events for those who can't afford to have an Eid that they would like. So it would be an Eid at a park. There would be the Eid prayer before. There would be a breakfast and a lunch, which is quite a beautiful thing to see. And I just hope that the lessons we learned during Ramadan and the solidarity we feel continue, not only for us as Muslims, but as part of the human family, as we are taught in the Quran that, the Almighty created us in nations and tribes so we may know each other.
Yep, and not so that we will become one global empire. But that's interesting. The passage you've cited it's a very good passage for reflections on the dangers of trying to resurrect the Tower of Babel. But that would be a more theological debate. But Shabnam, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you again, and we look forward to the next time that you jump on. Thank you for jumping on at such short notice, by the way. It was the Ramadan thing I wanted to play that was the first reason I wanted to have you on.
Right. I'm so sad. It was quite beautiful. Is there absolutely no way to do it?
Well, I'd have to start searching for it online, and I think that's
okay.
Because it wasn't a link you sent me; it was a forward.
Right.
Whereas if it was a link, I could literally just take the link and put it and screen share it. But it doesn't matter; it's fine. We'll have other opportunities. But thank you so much, Shabnam, for joining us as always, and we hope to speak to you again soon on Warrior Creed.
Absolute pleasure. Eid Mubarak and power to the people. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Well, that's the end of the show today, bro.
Okay.
Let's say goodbye to everybody, and as usual, thank you all for joining us. We'll have the audio file of this, the podcast version, on maajidnawaz.substack.com, released in time. But as always, you can watch it first live on our Warrior Creed channel on Rumble. Usman, concluding thoughts for today?
Well, I think if anyone's going away with anything, I think the concept of truth aspect there, if they watch the show, you sit there, think about what we've talked about there. Are you just going to another? Are you just going to another hypermart for your truth?
Yeah.
Or if you're a truth seeker, come and seek.
It's what we used to call it, the bandwagon. Remember that? Get off the bandwagon, right? So the bandwagon is currently headed to another destination, and are people realizing what the bandwagon is and who's jumped on it and whether they're headed in the same direction or not?
Yeah, on this show, read between the lines.
All right.
Watch the show and read between the lines.
Listen, on that note, we'll see you all next week, same time, Tuesday, 3 p.m. for Warrior Creed. And I've been the radical Maajid Nawaz, and there, that way. There he is.
There. Yeah.
All right. Until next time.
Now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
This service announcement brought to you in part by Warrior